This episode is brought to you by Mailtrap. More on them later.
Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron. On this very special episode of No Compromises podcast, episode 100, I'd like to talk to you about your boss.
Oh boy. what?
Okay, well, maybe not bosses specifically in general,
Okay.
but the idea that there's an admin or some sort of higher level user in your company that uses your tools that maybe you develop.
Mhm. Super
So
user. Yeah.
yeah, super user or something like that. And so, or even if you have programmer accounts, I fall victim to this a lot. Whereas I give myself a programmer account, give myself all the permissions, and then use that account all the time, and I don't necessarily bump into some of the other things that other users would. And that's why you might have unit tests, but not everyone tests every single role type on every single
Mhm.
permission and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. So there's this issue where I could be testing something that works for me, but it's not going to work for a normal user or an admin, which might be a lower level below my programmer account. And so I started thinking the other day, maybe there's a problem with giving admins and programmers access to everything.
Oh, I mean, aren't those the people you really want to make happy? Like, who cares if it breaks for a normal user? If the admin's happy, that's all that matters. No, I want to hear
Yes,
more about
yes,
that.
yes, and no. But this idea that an elevated user can do something that a normal user can,
Yeah.
that's not necessarily always a good idea. So I'll give a concrete example. Let's just say we have an admin interface where there's like user management, and then
Okay.
these users are like a normal user, and there's an admin user.
Yeah.
And normal users, when they're logged into the system, they can charge for a subscription, like a credit card. They can put in their credit card and get it charged, and then they get a subscription added on to their account, and then they have access to other things. So typical sort of SaaS
Yeah.
type thing, right?
Hmm.
The question is, should the admin be able to charge credit cards and accounts and stuff like that?
Like on other people's user accounts, you mean?
Well, even on themselves.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, those are two separate, different questions.
Right.
But in general, let's just start with the easier one, which is on themselves.
Okay.
So a lot of times we set up these things saying like, oh, well, if an admin has something like in a gate check or something, you
Mhm.
might just return right away and say true, and they have access to this thing and whatnot. But should an admin who never has need for a subscription have the ability to actually access the subscription area?
Okay.
And what kind of holes does that open up then? Because maybe your subscription section is based off the idea that there's a standard user with only access to the things standard users can have. Maybe there's a different process that happens when there's an admin. Maybe they can charge against any account. And then
Yeah.
is that a security hole?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting because normally when I think about this question, it's about like additional things we let them do. But you're saying like there might be some features a normal user could do that would not be appropriate to let an admin do just because of the nature of their role. Like, right, they're not going to be subscribing to our internal product. So why even give them that option? That's kind of the scenario, right?
Yeah. And I'm always thinking about what is the extra level of separation that we can give if we're being attacked or things like that,
Sure.
by malicious users.
Yeah.
An admin account is always going to be the highest level. So or like the one that's being targeted. So maybe let's make that less active in other parts of the system.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the same thing as like admins aren't really admins at all. They're just another level, like
Hmm.
called support. And
Hmm.
instead of making an admin that has access to everything, you make a support user and you just name it admin for the internal people. But really, that only has access to a few things.
Yeah. It's not ultimate privileges, but just what they need to get their job done.
Yeah. I mean, you could still argue that, they'll need to troubleshoot as users and stuff, but
Yeah.
that's where that sort of impersonation and taking
Hmm.
over an account and stuff can come into play as long as you're logging that someone initiated that and here's the
Sure.
things that they've done and whatnot. That's kind of how I would think you'd want to solve that more. And what do you think?
I yeah, I like that. I have to think a little bit more about the security angle. Because what you're saying, like generally speaking, an admin or like an elevated privilege user is a juicier target for somebody to like overtake. And so having that thought process in mind, like they can already do all these elevated things, but there's still some benefit in continuing to think that through. Like, does restricting them in some areas actually improve security? Like that
Yeah,
idea of a subscription. Does it make the subscription code simpler to not even have to handle the fact, oh, this is like an internal admin person and it goes down a different path, and like that could be the place where some of those security bugs creep in, right? Like,
yeah, you actually pointed out the specific thing I wanted to mention, which I didn't. So thank you.
oh,
Which is that like removing some of this stuff actually makes the code simpler
hmm,
and makes the canvas smaller of
yep,
attack if you want to look at it that way.
hmm,
And so even though you can argue and say, well, they still have access to users and blah blah blah. Well, the less amount of other features that we make dual ways for them to go through, I
yes,
guess, is more efficient and more secure and things like that. So it's not necessarily like the target itself of that user account. It's if someone were to do that, can they maybe issue 100
yeah,
different subscriptions, for
right,
example? It'd be much more difficult to log in and overtake 100 users over and over and over
hmm,
versus just posting, 100 subscriptions with your token with Postman or something.
yeah. I think I'm coming around. Like, not that I disagreed, but I'm sort of like getting up to speed with the thinking, and I do agree. Like, it's worth thinking about. And like, even when you said, oh, the dual roles through here, I'm thinking like it's never just two, right? Like, once you go down this path, well, an admin, they can do things like this way, but then now we do have this customer support person, and they're not quite an admin, so now you have like three paths through this code. And if you could just avoid that and just have
Mhm.
the system deal with like the primary use case of the actual user, and not have to complicate the code for these other kind of internal support role people. I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, so I guess the main idea then here is we're not against admins and people with elevated privileges,
Hmm.
but do they need access to all the things that you're building in for
Right.
them? Does it make sense? Sometimes when people say, do they need? It's like, do they have permission or should they be able to? It's two different types of questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Two different ways of looking at it. This episode is sponsored by MailTrap, an email delivery platform that developers love. An email sending solution with industry best analytics, SMTP, and email API, SDKs for major programming languages, and 24/7 human support. Try for free at mailtrap.io. It's going back a little ways, over 10 years, but I had a car. I think it was a Toyota Camry, if that's relevant for this story. But there's this weird thing that only when I pulled into my driveway, I would hear a knocking noise like in the head panel, like the roof above my head in
Hmm.
there. And it drove me nuts. At first, I thought I was going crazy. But what it was is we lived on a hill. And so there was like a little bit of an incline to pull into our driveway. And it was only if I was turning in from one direction, it would cause the car to like rotate a little bit side to side and something in the hood, not the hood, the head of the car to knock. So I'm like, whatever. Clearly I can't fix that, right? If there's something loose in there, like it's not affecting the drivability of the car. And it only happens this one time when I pull into my driveway.
What about the safety? Like, do
Maybe,
cars, are they supposed to like twist and turn like that?
maybe not. Yeah. So you're justifying what I did next, which is I brought it up the next time I was in having the car fixed. And
Customer says car makes weird noise when pulling into driveway.
that's right. This first of all, how can they reproduce it? I was fully prepared going in there to admit like there's no way I can show this to you. But here's the crazy thing. There was an active recall specifically about this issue where there's like a piece of some sort of like padding that could work its way loose, and there was like a remedy, and it didn't even cost me anything, right? So I was like ecstatic because I'm preparing to have to try to explain this to them and fight with them, but they didn't, right? You know what stinks though? After they fixed it, the noise went away, but like the rest of the hood, I keep saying hood, the head of the car was never the same. Like, because they had to pull all the fabric down,
Right.
and like the around the windshield there was like trim, and it raised the irritation level from like the one time I pulled into my driveway, I heard this noise, to like every time I drove now. It just like I could see all these things around me that weren't right. And so I guess the moral of the story is just learn to put up with weird noises in your car.
Oh, I would just say, no, just don't accept the car back. Be like, no, fix it.
we went through 2 rounds, and I reached a point where I'm like, they're just, it's never going to be the way it's supposed to be.
You're one of those people that complain about free stuff.
Yep, that's me exactly.
A lot of times for our call to actions, we get a little silly, but I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening to our podcast over these last couple of years. It's been really kind of an exciting thing for us to see that we can share our opinions, try to make the programming in Laravel world better. And that's just because of people like you.
Yeah, 100 is a kind of an arbitrary number, but it's a big milestone for us. So thank you for coming along for the ride.